And so it was like, okay, maybe I really need to get some help now. I talk about mental health. I studied it in my master's degree, but now I need to apply it to my own life. And so I think I just waited because I was trying to be too strong. And so when I realized seeking help made me stronger than I was before, that's when I was like, this is the great decision for me.
Welcome to the Writing on My Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emanuela Stanislaus, doctorate coach and diversity consultant. I finished my doctorate in 4 years while working full-time, traveling the world, and balancing a busy social life, and now I'm on a mission to create community for other BIPOC women to complete their doctorate degrees. Join me as I discuss the ups and downs of pursuing a doctoral degree. I'll be sharing personal stories, and I'm bringing some friends along for revealing conversations about their doctoral journey and provide inspiration for others to level up as doc students. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emanuela Stanislaus, and today I'm excited to welcome a special guest in the guest chair. Today we have Dr. Malissa Sanon, and I'm just going to jump into her bio. As a professional in higher education, Dr. Malissa Sanon is a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. Dr. Sanon has presented at higher education institutions, podcasts, and granted television interviews on DEI as well as mental health issues among Black men. She is excited to bring her wealth of experience to collaborate with individuals, organizations, communities, and institutions toward a journey of sustainable transformation as well as unprecedented growth. Dr. Sanon's most recent TED Talk, How Would You Respond When You Hear a Peep?, was about raising and reinforcing awareness of mental health among Black men. And I'm excited to have you here today, Dr. Sanon. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this great podcast and allowing me to share with the world my mission and my vision. So I appreciate being here with you today.
Awesome. You and me both. I'm excited to have this great conversation with you. And, we're going to talk about your journey and get into your dissertation as well. So hopefully everybody enjoys this conversation. So let's just jump right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about your PhD journey?
The PhD journey was frightening, it was rewarding, it was scary, but I'm so glad I had a cohort of members to lean on for support. I also had writing partners that we would pick one day of the week to just write. And this was instrumental for me because it held me accountable. Some days were easier than others. I was up late, woke up very early. Some days I was sitting at the computer with tears in my eyes because I was overwhelmed. I had some anxiety increased. I was so stressed when I was under pressure. It was agonizing. But then there was good days where I felt like I was making progress. There was days where my committee would just pour into me with words of affirmation and confirm that I can do it. And my family and friends that supported me throughout the journey also reminded me often that I can get through it. So it was all of these emotions.
Awesome. I can definitely relate to the both sides of it, the struggle as well as some of the bright sides too, where you're like, I'm actually doing this and I'm doing the best that I can and I'm killing it at certain points, but then also feeling overwhelmed as well. And so thank you for that honesty. And so tell me too, like, what made you decide or what influenced you to pursue your doctorate?
I decided to pursue my PhD when I didn't know what was coming next. I was approaching graduation in my first master's of clinical mental health counseling, and I was asking a professor their advice on how I should move forward. So when we were talking, she asked me if I wanted to teach in the mental health field and be a professor, and I said no. And she said, well, if you get your PhD in this mental health counseling field, that's what you're going to be looking at, your options, as well as, being a counselor. And so she encouraged me actually that I should look into higher education, because at that time I was also an assistant for multicultural programs, and she saw the work that I was doing on campus. So she said maybe you should think about a career in higher education. So I did. I applied for different programs pursuing a PhD in higher education.
That's great. So you had a mentor of sorts in a professor that was able to kind of give you some ideas and career paths. And so you started to look at programs. What was the process that you took to determine which program was right for you and ultimately settling on Florida Atlantic University, which is where I currently work?
Yes. So at the time, I was looking at programs that would allow me to move closer to family. And so I was looking in the areas that my parents and my siblings were, because I knew I wanted to move back home. So I applied for two programs, Florida Atlantic and Florida International University. And I did my research on both educational programs. I looked at both institutions. I noticed at Florida Atlantic University, they would have granted me a secondary master's degree once I completed about 42 credit hours within the PhD program. And so when I applied, I made sure that I was like very intentional. And so I was happy when I got in. I was super excited. My friends and I celebrated. In 2015, I started the program at Florida Atlantic University, fresh out of grad school with my master's degree. So I picked my program because I knew I wanted to be with family in that area.
Great. So, a lot of strategy in your process, making sure that you were around family, which I don't know in hindsight if you feel like that was kind of very needed, especially with how hard that journey was. But then also trying to be strategic with getting an additional degree during that path. So, definitely helpful and probably something that some of our listeners will find helpful. So, did you work while pursuing your doctorate? And if so, how did you go about balancing work and school?
So I'm a first generation Haitian American scholar, and I knew that I needed to work. Throughout my bachelor's degree, my first master's degree is just working was something that I knew I had to do. My family couldn't afford to support me. They did when I called them and I said that I needed it, but I tried to hold myself accountable and make sure that I was doing what I needed to do as far as my spending, financial literacy. So I knew when I was going into the program that I had to work, but I had just moved back in with my parents, so I didn't have a job at first. And then my cousin actually offered me to work with her. She worked at an after school program. So for the first semester in my PhD program, I was working at an after school program. Then I saw a research assistant position open at the university, and I was like, okay, let me apply for this job and hopefully it could help me pursue my degree and put money in my pocket. And that was the biggest blessing, one of the biggest blessings in the program. So sometimes I worked 40 hours a week, sometimes I worked 30 hours. It just depends on the projects we were doing. We worked on grants, curriculum, program redesign, strategic planning. I did research related to teacher preparation programs. So I helped with the teachers who are pursuing their degree and being assistant principals and principals. So we worked on that program. And so it was long jury hours sometimes, and doing that while being in school was very tough. But since I worked on campus, had access to some of my professors. So if I had a question that I wasn't clear about, I could go right down the hallway to their office, and I built relationships with them because I was always on campus at that time. And so that really helped me. I know that some people don't have those similar same opportunities. And so if working is something that you need to do, it's important to take care of yourself and prioritize yourself when doing these things. Because even though I was working, I had to find my balance. So when I was in class, I focused on class. When I was with family, I focused on family. And so sometimes it was hard for me to tell my family I can't make an event or I can't make dinner because I was working on a project or I was working on research, but it was something that I had to sacrifice. And so it came with a lot of sacrifice. But again, I had to be intentional about where I was putting my time and efforts into it. And so I like to call it work life integration because I had to integrate those different parts of me so I could succeed.
Great advice. And, when you talk about being that research assistant, that is one of the things that I kind of wish that I had more time. I worked full time while pursuing my doctorate. And so I wasn't around in those spaces that a lot of those interesting conversations happen or opportunities for collaboration to happen and things like that. And so you bring up that good point and maybe even great advice for folks if they have flexibility to try and find times to be in those hallways and, have opportunities to talk to faculty outside of the classroom. And so thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about what it was like for you being a Black woman pursuing your doctorate in your program.
Me being a Black woman pursuing this degree, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome. That is when you have this thought that you are not good enough or you're not worthy enough to be in those positions or to be in those rooms. And I felt a little of that imposter syndrome when the first day of class, I went into this room with all these different people, and I didn't have a degree or a background in higher education. I just left the mental health field. So, really, that's all I knew as far as the textbook information. I worked as an assistant on campus in the multicultural program. So, I knew a little bit about college students and how to work with them, but I didn't have, again, that research or that textbook knowledge. And so I was a little intimidated at first. And I remember going home and talking to my brother and all and telling him, like, they don't talk like me. And he encouraged me that they'll be listening to me and they will understand whatever I say to them. And so I took that advice and I kept pushing. And I was really struggling and thought, like I said, imposter syndrome seeking in, thought I wasn't worthy or smart enough to be in the program. But when I quickly got into the actual work and the actual education piece, the actual research, I was reminded that I was here on a mission and I needed to do this for myself, for my family, and for my community. So that helped me when I was working through the process. I remember being told I was overambitious, and that's because some people do not have the full picture and their vision is different from the vision that God has for you. And so when I remember when I was confiding in someone that I wanted to pursue my PhD, she was like, "What? Why would you do that?" And so from then on, I knew that I had to keep my idea to myself because not everyone has that vision. Not everyone could see that bigger picture. So being over ambitious is not a bad thing. And so I am proud to be here to say that I finished and that it was a challenge, but it was worthwhile.
Thank you for sharing that. And you bring up a good point about, just being careful who you share your dreams with because there are many people walking on this planet who are dream killers. And kudos to you for not allowing that person's limited view kind of impact your career trajectory. So kudos for that.
Yeah, and it wasn't as if the person was trying to downplay me or trying to think that, I couldn't do it. It was just like I said, their vision wasn't the same as mine. And so these dream killers, sometimes they're not purposely trying to pull you down. So it's just all about that discernment, right? Knowing who do you need to talk to and when you need to talk to them because that's important.
Definitely. Discernment is key. So, what do you know now that you wish that you knew when you started your program?
I wish I had started my counseling sessions earlier within my program because I did seek counseling on campus, but that was like 3 years into the program. So I wish I would have did that earlier. As soon as day one started, I wish I would have seeked a counselor. I also wish I would have researched more Black researchers in my field when I was citing about mental health in my community. I wish I would have did more of citing Black authors in my dissertation and just overall in the program when I was doing my different assignments.
So, you talked a little bit about waiting too long to seek the help of a mental health professional. And I talk a lot about mental health especially during the doctoral journey on this podcast, and want to see if you mind sharing a little bit about your experience and what led you, like, why do you think you waited so long and what led you to ultimately seek the help?
When I started seeking the help, I hit a point in my life where I couldn't fix it by myself. I always feel like I could do it. I can fix everything. And so when I realized that I needed more support, like this wasn't just me being sad or me being over anxious, like it was blocking my ability to think clearly. Sometimes I had brain fog, or sometimes my thoughts were scattered. I was thinking about 100 things at one time, and I was just struggling to get things completed. And so it was like, okay, maybe I really need to get some help now. I talk about mental health. I studied it in my master's degree, but now I need to apply it to my own life. And so I think I just waited because I was trying to be too strong. And so when I realized seeking help made me stronger than I was before, that's when I was like, this is the great decision for me.
Great advice. I think mental health, like you talked about, it just gives you the tools to get unstuck. Because sometimes there are patterns that are happening, and we may not see them clearly. And a mental health professional can help to see those things and help us to find the tools to be more successful. So, what are you doing now and how does that relate to your program and or the research that you did with your dissertation?
So, my research is titled If You Can't Make a Sound, Make a Peep, a narrative inquiry of the lived collegiate experiences of Black male students who dealt with suicide ideation. And so, when I was doing this research, I really wanted to help my own community. I was reflecting on myself and my family, and I really picked this population because it was near and dear to me. When I finished the dissertation, I was granted the opportunity to do a TED Talk. I was invited to do a TED Talk, and I was like, great. I just finished this dissertation. Like, this is what I want to share with the world. And how can I do that? And so, as I was writing to come up with a script, I had an epiphany, and I was like, I really like that phrase, if you can't make a sound, make a peep. This was actually a quote from one of my participants in the research. So I used that word PEEP and created an acronym to help support a person who makes a PEEP. And so the acronym stands for P, pause and listen, E, elevate their voice, E, encourage them, and P, to be present. And I think this method is applicable to everyone. So I'm glad I was able to come up with this concept and be able to share it, not only in the TED Talk, but also for social media, for my website, for things like that. I keep talking about PEEP in this method, and I just want people to continue to remind themselves that it's okay to make a PEEP. And then the people who are the ones who are listening to the PEEP, give them concrete tools on how to respond.
Great. And I will also add a link to the TED Talk in the show notes for sure. It was great and I enjoyed watching it as well. And I know too, with PEEP, you're talking specifically about men, but here, on the Writing on My Mind podcast, we're all about women of color, right? And so I wanted to talk about this concept of PEEP. You talked about it being applicable to anyone, right? And so I think some of the things that you talked about are great for even faculty who want to support women of color doctoral students, right? And so for me, when you talk about PEEP, I was wondering, how can women of color make a peep? Like, what does that look like? And I think too, when you're talking about peep, it's about trying to get the support, I guess, and yeah, support that you need, whether it's in crisis or if they have a concern or are in need of support.
As a Black woman and going through this process, I think I was able to recognize that I needed the support. And so I would just tell someone, a close friend, or, my accountability partners, like, I'm not feeling myself today. And so it was a process that I had to acknowledge. And sometimes we continue to move so quickly. We continue to go about our day, and we ignore some of our own well-being when we're trying to do all these things, save the world, have our invisible capes on, because black women do a lot for the world. And so it's okay to take a step back and allow yourself to actually self-evaluate and think about, how am I feeling? Am I tired? Why am I so tired? What am I doing? Can this wait until later? Things like that, so we could be able to make that peep with our friends, with our family members, even our spouses, to be able to say, hey, I need a minute. Can we talk? Or can you just listen to me for a second?
I love that. Thank you for that very practical piece to that. And I think too, you mentioned something too about, just allowing us to be vulnerable and to ask others, for help when we need that. So thank you for that. I think a lot of people will gain something from that and find some use in the advice that you just shared. So, what's next for Dr. Malissa Sanon? What do you have up your sleeves next?
The next for Dr. Sanon is going to be going international with this PEEP method, more TED Talks, creating more digital content so individuals can have these concrete tools relatively available to them, and continue to build my business, Melissa Sanon LLC, as an empowerment speaker, so I can continue to share this message and this word.
Love it. International. Yes, we're taking over. And I think what you're doing and the work that you're doing is so important. So much luck in that area. And so, with that, I wanted to see if you're ready for the lightning round questions.
I am ready.
Awesome. So these are just quick questions that I ask, and you just say the first thing that comes to mind. And, you're answering them with the framework of, or the frame of mind of, as a doc student when you were a doc student. So let's jump right into it. So, what was your favorite mantra?
My favorite mantra is, it is bigger than myself. And the reason why I go so hard is because I know someone else needs it.
Love it. Okay, getting inspiration from others in the community. Okay, next one. What is one thing you couldn't live without as a doc student?
Sleep.
Yeah, totally. Yes, I love my sleep.
Love it. I had to make sacrifice sometimes, but when it was over, listen.
Yeah, it's been a year for me, and I'm still trying to get my rest from those days. So yes, totally understandable. Okay, so what was your favorite hype song?
So before I defended my dissertation, I listened to Won't He Do It by Corin Hawthorne all day, the day before and like minutes before I defended.
Okay, I gotta look that up. Okay, sounds good. Okay, what was your go-to practice to celebrate your wins?
My go-to practice to celebrate my wins is, I'm a frequent flyer, so I love to travel. So anytime I had like a break, anytime I had like a couple of weeks, an extended weekend, I would travel. Me and my girlfriends, like, we call ourselves the road runners. And so we would go different places, and I would say the Caribbean is my favorite place to visit. So all the island.
Yeah, that was my favorite thing too, to celebrate my wins, and I love going to the Caribbean. So yes, what's your favorite Caribbean island?
Ooh, that's hard. So I really had a great time when I went to Haiti, like really, really great time. And I also had a fabulous time when I went to Trinidad and Tobago. I liked Trinidad more than I did Tobago, but both of those vacations were like the highlight of my existence right now.
Love it. Yeah, I went off a little from the lightning round questions, but love asking other people with that. Yes, Haiti is beautiful. I know many people that's not like the first thing that comes to mind. And I haven't been, well, I've been to the Trinidad airport, but not explored the island. So I need to add that to my list. So thank you for sharing. And then the last lightning round question: best piece of advice you've received as a doc student?
Do it and do it afraid. And so, as a PhD student, I had finished my comprehensive exams. I was done with my coursework and I was ready to start my career, but I still needed to finish my dissertation. I end up taking a job, a full time position, and moving out of the state while doing my PhD. And so, I was told to do it and do it afraid. And that was the best advice that I got because I was thriving. And even though it was scary, even though I didn't know what was coming, even though there was a lot of things that I thought that could have gone wrong, everything was right. So the best advice I could give is to do it and do it afraid.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite pieces of advice too, because everyone is scared. No one really knows what they're doing too. We're all navigating this world and trying to figure it out, and so not letting fear stop us from, moving forward. So thank you for that, and thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing some of your knowledge and insight. And I know our audience is going to enjoy this conversation and get something out of it that can help them along their journey. And so, definitely wanted to thank you for that and leave space for you to share how people can connect with you or follow you.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this podcast. I had a great time, and thank you all for listening. And just thank you. And so you can follow me or find me on all social media as Melissa Sanon, M as in Mary, A as in Apple, L as in Larry, I as in Ice, S as in Sam, S as in Sam, A as in Apple. Sanon, S as in Sam, A as in Apple, N as in Nancy, O as in Open, N as in Nancy. That's all social media and also my website at melissasanon.com. You can see all the TED Talk. You can see all the featured podcasts. You can see all the great interviews that I've done thus far and share in this joy with me. If you subscribe to the website, you'll get a motivational Monday every week. And it's just a little bit of encouragement on a Monday. You know how Mondays can be hard. So you can have access to that at melissasanon.com as well.
Great. And I will definitely add all of that to the show notes. So definitely check out the show notes to see how you can stay connected with Dr. Sanon. And again, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, make sure you subscribe and rate the show on Apple Podcasts and spread the word to other women of color doctoral students to grow our community. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Emanuela. And if you're looking for a group of real women of color doctoral students to help you accomplish your goals, join the Writing on My Mind community by visiting writingonmymindpodcast.com. See you on the next episode.